You're listening to The Big Lift, the podcast of Web Trends Optimize, the CRO solution that enables marketers and developers to maximize the ROI on their digital properties. Web Trends Optimize is a powerful, feature-rich and easy-to-use solution, all delivered within a fixed-price contract with no additional cost for increased functionality ever. During these podcasts, we meet some of the key influencers within the marketing and conversion world to understand their roles and examine their challenges. In today's discussion, I talk with Simon Eaton, Managing Director of 50, an audience insight-led agency, about how a human-first approach to marketing is essential in a cookieless world. We investigate how 50's technology can uncover the interconnections between people, helping to make sense of the mountains of social, web and even CRM data. We also uncover how they use these interconnections to determine where their client's audience will be rather than tracking where they currently are. Simon, tell me about 50 and how it differs from a traditional marketing agency.
Well, John, I think the biggest difference between us and a lot of other people out there is that we have technology at the heart of the business. It's very easy to say and very prolific, I suppose, in market to say that you're data-led or you're insights-led. Mm-hmm. I think the difference between us and a lot of other providers is we have genuine proprietary technology at our core. We actually began life as an insights business. So we've evolved to become a media or traditional marketing agency, as you put it. So I think it's that technology that really sets us apart. You know, it's taken us a very long time to develop. It's sort of 7 years and somewhere around £10 million. So it's sort of it is a real differentiator between us and sort of a standard solution where people need to bring in that technology as opposed to sort of build it from the ground up.
And would that mean that your technology leads what you do, or is it that's just now part of the overall mix that you offer a client?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's a constant internal quandary as to exactly how to frame that. For a potential customer. I think the technology is the primary asset, but I think it is important to not let it totally lead you. I think you do need to have human beings, obviously to press the buttons on the technology, to interpret the information, but also when it comes to being a marketing agency from a brand's perspective, you've got to be offering service and humanity and all of these things that the technology in itself can't solve, at least not yet.
Okay. So now we've talked about the fact that you've got this technology that is the core of your business, if you like, and you wrap stuff around it. What actually is that differentiating technology then?
I think the differentiating technology is the ability to start at the process of when it comes to marketing strategy that much earlier, by adding value, by understanding audience. And by audience, I mean understanding customers, I suppose, current customers, future customers, but then having tangible output from those learnings. I think it's, the evolution of the business from insights through to media activation is natural because that's where the budgets are from a brand's perspective. I think it would be lovely if everybody, and we're idealists, I certainly am, I think it would be lovely if everybody was investing in audience understanding to the same level that they invest into audience activation. But that's simply not the case. So action from the back of the insights is it's the key thing that everybody wants. Everybody's got a job to do. Everybody's got targets. Everybody's got growth ambitions. So I've not answered your question very well, but essentially understanding the audience but having meaningful results from it is probably our ethos, if you like, the value that we're trying to bring to market.
So that kind of technology that you're using and providing this, it sounds like it's, as you said, proprietary. Is that a service that you offer through to other marketing agencies as a kind of, you can have access to our technology, but obviously, not the IP or anything like that?
To a certain extent, although I think we're conscious of keeping the value internally primarily. I think we attempted a few years back to turn the technology into SaaS, software as a service, but it's relatively complex, and we realized that actually the best results were the combination of our team using our technology. So although we would have liked to have released it out to market for other agencies to use, when we tested that, it simply wasn't adding as much value as when we did it. Having said that, we do partner with lots of complementary businesses in the marketing sphere who we give considerable access to the technology. For example, you might say a creative agency, super important when it comes to, obviously executing digital media or otherwise. And the insights into the human beings that can buy the product next are valuable in their world, as well as valuable from our side of creating media plans and then executing on that data.
So I noticed, looking at your LinkedIn profile, you've spent over the span of your career about 4 years in sales. And I think, having spent 50% of my career in sales and 50% in marketing, I think that does give you a kind of desire to understand your audience better. Do you think that's helped you personally in what you're doing today?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I it might look like 4 years on LinkedIn, but if I'm totally honest, I think we're all in sales all the time, aren't we, to some extent?
Yeah, it's not quite so blatant, though, when you're a sales director or something like that. So, yes, I would agree with you. Even in marketing, you're in sales.
Yes. Has it helped? I think it has, because actually the principles of doing your own sales, like whether it's, B2B marketing, of trying to get people to adapt your technology, is actually not that different from being a B2C business or D2C business and trying to acquire customers, convince them that you've got a good solution, that you can help them in their daily lives or professional lives. So I think, yes, I see marketing and sales as being arguably perfectly aligned, although I wonder if that signifies the return of the sales and marketing director. I have seen a few jobs in the last 6 months where that seems to be making a bit of a comeback. So maybe I'm not alone in that particular view.
I tend to agree. I've seen a number of sales and marketing roles appearing now, because obviously it's a nice thing to have a sales and marketing director who understands both sales and marketing, because they're both reliant upon one another. But I'm not sure whether that is, how would I describe it, not a master of any, but actually just having an understanding of both, and probably not a deep understanding of either side. So I don't know whether it's going to come back, only time will tell, but it's certainly, I'm seeing a few of those things coming up as well. The other thing that I noticed from your website at 50 is that you're very proud of your eco credentials, which are not just, as you would say, net zero, but climate positive. Do you think that actually has a bearing with regard to how you attract and keep new customers?
Yes, it does, but perhaps not as much as I would like, if I'm totally honest. I say that from a sort of personal view perspective, as well as, working for the business. I think it depends on the scale of the client as to where they put the priority of sustainability, typically. That's what we're seeing right now. We have one clients, probably on two facets. One, that core ability to understand audiences really well, but it is often second or third on certainly bigger brands' priority lists, that the providers they use across the board are sustainable. I think marketing has kind of got away with it, for especially digital marketing. It's got away with not really entering that conversation and not having to be seen to offer a genuinely sustainable solution. Mostly we plant some trees, we carbon offset our company's travel, which is relatively easy to do, and I think obviously everybody should be doing. The more interesting thing for me is the technology greener than the technology that's being used before? And in that extent, we are greener. I can't give you the actual statistics because we're still trying to work out the exact impact on a digital marketing strategy of understanding your audience first and then utilizing all of that deep information to target them later, as opposed to tracking every individual. Well, users is obviously the term that's generally used, but tracking them across every device, every website, every app, whatever it is that they're using. And that is a huge energy drain. Like some of the statistics available on the internet of the impact. I saw one recently that said that 4% of an individual's carbon impact is, and I can't verify this statistic, but is based on the digital advertising that they see. So it's important that this industry clearly has a massive impact on the environment, and it's up to us to try and improve things as far as I'm concerned.
You mentioned just now that you have the ability to track people across various websites, various devices and things like that. How does that resonate with your clients with regard to this fear of their users thinking that they're being tracked? Because obviously, there's been uproar with regard to Google and remarketing and all that sort of thing, and that's kind of going by the wayside to a degree. But do your clients actually embrace what you're doing in that respect?
Yeah, I think that's probably... we have three key pillars, and other than the sustainability, the second one is privacy. I think society is the place that leads change. When the customers start being vociferous about not wanting something, not companies and the brands that they like to buy the products from, if they're doing things that the customer doesn't like, it starts impacting profits, it starts impacting share price, and brands are forced to make that change. Privacy is one of those things that seems to be pretty high up, certainly in the UK, people's agenda. I think, as I said, the same process applies. Understanding people at their core uses a lot less energy and is just a sensible way of doing it, rather than the old-fashioned method of, you have visited these 6 websites and these 3 apps, therefore you're probably likely to visit this one next, which is relatively dehumanizing. It produces very little wider learning, but it is the standard that this industry has created for itself, and it's sort of backed itself into a corner, whereas privacy as well as and sustainability are not going away.
Yeah.
The methods employed by brands and by their agencies needs to keep up, and ideally, my perspective is lead that change. Treat people with respect, and that's why we look at audiences, and I say that term specifically because we look at groups of human beings, what Google would call a cohort. We're actively trying to move away from that individual tracking,
right,
because of its carbon impact and because of the fact it is, relatively rude, if I can put it that way.
Going to your website, I noticed that your website describes your business as understanding humans, and you've mentioned that a couple of times so far. That's a pretty confident statement. How do you substantiate this claim? What is it that you're actually, I'll use the word lucidly, selling to clients, which actually shows that you do understand humans?
I think it's a good question. I think it's moving the conversation away from, as I was saying, dehumanizing language like user, cookie, these sort of ways of tracking human beings that's just not specific or especially useful. One of our primary sources of understanding human beings is via social media data, public social media data. So all stuff that anybody can do themselves, but for what we've achieved is mapping huge amounts of insight cross-platform. But the difference with social media and, say, gathering data from websites and apps and things like that is that the human beings that you're researching, and it also doesn't include any private information. So I think we all, as people, are ourselves on social media. One of the things we're interested in is not, we are interested in what people say, we are interested in sentiment and that sort of thing, but we're also interested in network. Like an individual on social media, certainly on the ones that don't include your family and friends, so things like Twitter and Reddit and all sorts of stuff like that, YouTube perhaps, the things you follow are the things that you love. And by using that data, it's very human, because we're actually delving deeply into people's preferred brands, the people that are influencing them, the media titles that they're engaging with, the topics that they're interested in, the football team that they support, or the cricket team, or perhaps they prefer classical music. You've only got to look on, my favourite platform still, I say this reservedly, is still Twitter. And if you looked at the things that I follow, I think you'd probably be able to get a pretty decent understanding of me as a human being. Like, I've spent a long time curating my feed, and as much as an algorithm may be trying to mess with that on an ongoing basis, Reddit's also a good example of this. I follow the subreddits of the things I am most passionate about. We've always felt that this is a great source of understanding, and so long as it's not personal, it's all very modern and privacy centric.
You mentioned something there about you see the real person within social media. I would beg to differ in certain instances. For instance, if you look at Facebook, there's a lot of pretense, and Instagram, there's a lot of pretense, especially among younger audiences, with regard to who they want to be perceived as opposed to who they really are. And I understand that your technology is not really aimed at the individual, but I think social media as a construct, I suppose, has got a lot of pluses and a lot of minuses to go with it. So looking at non-individual data, I would agree with you that you can get an awful lot of understanding from people's behaviour as to what they follow and which websites they visit and what football team they support, if they do support such a football team. So you've mentioned this audience insights. Is that, how do you harvest that? Is this your technology that goes and searches through social media feeds and things like that to be able to pull out who they are, or I won't say which group they're in?
Yes, exactly. So our method is to pull together multiple massive public data sources, which come from all sorts of different social platforms, from web behavior, as a way of then segmenting an audience and then being able to deep dive into it to allow us and I suppose our clients to make better decisions. Is sort of a primary output. But I think there are two or three things, I suppose. One, data is typically very dull. Yeah. I say that as a person who has a very short attention span. Mm-hmm. Data platforms have often been quite. They've been designed for the builder, for the insights professional, for the marketeer, mm-hmm. Whereas, sorry, not for the marketeer. Or the business leader, the decision maker. So I think it's about having the data that you're using itself is super important. The scale of that data is very important, because a lot of brand audience understanding is still typically living in what I would consider an out of date age. It's based off of surveys, focus groups, panel based research, and those things are they are valuable. It is important to get to that granular level of detail, obviously, but they have to be extrapolated across whole markets in order to inform decision making, which can often be quite a small sample, and it also takes a long time, and it isn't directly actionable. These are the problems that we're trying to solve: is make the audience scale large enough. Use a methodology that's robust. And I just wanted to go back to your previous comment. Social media, for me, has a significant weakness from a data perspective when it focuses only on the conversation. What people say is entirely untrustworthy, like typically. But there's another problem with that. Most people don't actually post anything. So when you focus in on what people say, you end up focusing on the most emotional people on the internet.
I agree.
Which is not, it's not a very good data
No.
source. Whereas there is value in it, but I think only when you're also looking at other ways of understanding that audience. So rather than try and replace these traditional methodologies, we see ourselves as a complement. But I guess the benefit of it also being digital information, and then us having built the capability, is that it is directly actionable as viable digital marketing audiences, which is very difficult to do from a survey or a panel, from some panel-based research or something like that. Does that make sense? Have I explained that properly?
And it's much more instant as well. You can get information digitally far quicker than doing a physical survey or something like that. And having spoken with a consumer psychologist on a number of occasions, it's people will give the answers in which you want them based upon the questions in which you ask. So it's definitely much more, I suppose, independent to actually get their thought processes through using where they visit and what they've done and what their likes and dislikes are, rather than just asking them a question. Hopefully they'll come back with the answer that you want. You mentioned that you harvest this information. One of the things that's been buzzing around in the marketing world for the last 3 or 4 months is ChatGPT. Does not ChatGPT allow companies to be able to gather this sort of information much more quickly and much more freely, or have you got something which, trumps ChatGPT?
Yeah, it's a very of the moment conversation, obviously. I'll move it over, if I can, slightly just to the general topic of AI.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we have integrated 2 genuine pieces of AI into our platform already, at 2 different stages. So I'm not sure if I can answer the question specifically, because I'm not sure what everybody else is doing.
Mm-hmm.
I think from our side, we're trying to utilize this new technology as quickly and as meaningfully as possible. Just to give you a very top line view, initially we use a piece of AI to both segment the audience, analyze the data within an audience, and then name that cohort of people, which we call a tribe. But essentially solving the problem, whether you consider it a problem or not, of a human taking a very long time to do that, and the AI being able to do it instantly. When I first started working in 50 many years ago, these pieces of work were taking up to 4 days. They now take, I think, sort of 20 or 30 minutes. Yeah. So the AI allows us to build sort of bespoke segmentation that doesn't require any pre-definition. So I think that's one of the problems in audience understanding. It's often you're fitting people into boxes before you've even started looking at the data. And obviously with human bias and human preconceptions, when you allow technology to perform that segmentation and then interpret that information and simply provide you with the answers, you're utilizing AI in a very positive way. The human can then be utilized to use their nuance and their understanding of the problem in hand to tailor that information to the question. The second piece, we're also using another piece of AI to layer that information and make it buyable on every digital channel, which I'm not entirely sure a human would ever be able to do. It's so ChatGPT itself, I think, is just going to end up being one of a large mix of AIs that are publicly available. The Bard experiment in itself has come on leaps and bounds in the last couple of months. But we're trying to keep up, trying to use it as much as is possible, essentially.
So you mentioned about these tribes, and tribes is a very good word because it's a group of people rather than a bucket, and a bucket, as you say, is usually determined beforehand. These tribes that are being created, how do you turn that information that's in that tribe into a propensity to convert? Because I'm sure that's what most of your clients are looking to be able to do. Is it you've got a myriad of data in front of you, even through data visualization, and then you say, actually, we need to treat this tribe like that, and we need to treat another tribe like that?
Simple answer is yes. I think tailoring the communication depending on the audience segments that you see is super important. But where this usually starts, when we start trying to understand an audience, it's usually to solve a particular challenge.
Right.
So it's not usually just a blank canvas piece of analysis. It's a business usually has an objective that they, usually a tough one. That's why they start working with a fast growth technology business like us. And our insights will be designed to solve that particular problem. So, we allow the audience to segment itself, and then it's up to working closely with the client to work out which audiences can solve the question, solve the problem at hand. So sometimes, this could be creative tailoring, it could be platform strategy, but it is usually relatively self-explanatory when you see the audiences in front of you, how to speak to them, and I think it not necessarily what part of a marketing funnel to speak to them about. I think it depends what the brief is at the beginning, as to the specifics of what you solve with each piece of insight.
Obviously, your technology, because you're not defining these tribes, you could have dozens, maybe even hundreds of tribes. So how do you understand which tribes are the ones that you should use as a group of people or group of individuals to be able to make that work for the question that you're looking for an answer to?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think initially we look at, we usually solve two things with a piece of analysis. The first piece is some of the tribes will reconfirm what the client expects to see, but perhaps wasn't necessarily able to prove. But those tribes usually don't move the dial. Where it gets interesting is where you reveal other tribes that maybe have been guessed at or somebody in the business thinks is there, but wasn't necessarily able to prove and didn't have the data to commit to running marketing or driving creative strategy to try and acquire those people as customers at a greater scale. The growth is usually how you choose the tribes that are the most interesting. Which tribes are going to underpin new customers? Who's going to actually grow this business and move the sales forwards? So are there too many tribes? Do you ever use all of them? No, you never use all of them. In the real world, we probably would typically highlight 3 or 4 key groups, then build a strategy around those audiences, tie it in with appropriate creative. You might target the men and the women differently. You might target the students and the older people differently. Then each tribe leads to its own platform strategy and its own targeting strategy. But in the real world, there are limitations. Yeah. We're working with one big brand at the moment that sent us over 750 creatives for a recent campaign. And therefore, their tribe, their appropriate tribe list could be a lot longer. In the real world, most businesses do not have that kind of creative resource, and they certainly can't get the creatives made quickly enough. So you're often focusing on 2 or 3 key audiences, probably 2 that you're quite confident are going to work, and then maybe a slightly more punt tribe, something that's a slightly more risky. If it doesn't work, the benefit of having segmented the audience with a nice long list of tribes is there's a menu of other audiences to try. Instead of having to pull the rabbit out of a hat or guess, which is what typically marketeers and agencies have to do in order to drive growth, everything can come from this amazing audience understanding so that the chances of success are much higher. Hopefully I've explained that.
Yeah, it's a good explanation. You mentioned just in that last sentence that you use the appropriate channel to be able to refocus what you want to do with that particular tribe, and presumably that's going back and maybe utilising social media to be able to attract people back, or website content, or maybe even email marketing to be able to use an old-fashioned kind of terminology. But is it something that those sorts of things all then have to go through some level of A/B testing or CRO to be able to see that the content that's being written around that is then productive enough to be able to make those conversions?
Yeah, I think it depends on the client's expectations, what they've seen as success before, what are their ambitions. And it's important for us to frame that, our solution, although as innovative and as awesome as it is not a silver bullet. It's about still having quality creative, telling a strong brand story, and trying to improve the conversion percentage or the video through rate. But I think it's also about our job as marketing supplier, if you like, is about changing the conversation away from digital marketing metrics. I think the industry is generally quite obsessed with talking about clicks and
absolutely
attribution and all that sort of thing. Whereas what's really interesting for me is, are we improving your business? Are we driving growth? Are we helping you launch that new product in that new market? Are we helping you understand audience beyond your core? Because these are the things that are sort of actually going to drive that business forwards. And from a purely selfish perspective, if we move the dial for the brands we work with them for longer. I'd much rather our clients were a success over the long term, because we get to keep a customer.
So does your technology, your solution, let's put it that way, it's not just the technology, your solution, deliver a realistic ROI, or are your clients not necessarily looking at, I spent £2,000 and therefore I want to have 2,000 times X return on investment?
No, it does do that. I think when you're a new business in market, and we're not as new as we used to be, the only marketing campaigns that you win are performance marketing campaigns. Yeah. Your solution, your model has to be proven to sell the product for less money than whatever the client was using before. Then you get to move, you have the luxury of moving up the marketing funnel, if you like, to start working on engagement work and awareness work. Yeah. And I think that's the journey that we've been on, that it's natural through a platform like ours to find new audiences. And I think as much as, retargeting and selling to the core audience, a real problem that we solve for people is that they're often extremely expert understanding the core customer who buys the product now. But there's been a relatively healthy obsession with CRM, first-party data, things like this. But we're sort of trying to complement that with a growth solution to find the next set of customers, as well as focus on your current ones.
Well, Simon, we're drawing to a close now, and I would say that in the economic climate that we're in at the moment, where there would be a potential for price to trump everything, in a market which is dominated by online sales, and has been for the vast number of years, it's something that I think that more and more companies will be looking to be able to understand not their core market, but the one that's next going to be core, the one that's going to be their new customers and things like that. So it sounds like your technology and your solution is driving a particular, or there's an appetite for your solution out there, because obviously people are looking to be able to continue their growth even in a market which is shrinking due to price. Anyway, thank you very much for your time. It's been a very, very good and interesting 30-40 minutes or so, and I'm sure time will tell how things progress along the way, but it's definitely going to be interesting times ahead. So for now, thank you very much.
Really enjoyed it. Thank you, John.